You have two choices. Continue living underground, or stay on the surface world and die.
Alright, so towards the end of 2023, my brother, who kind of has this knack for finding weird and obscure little games, he brought a game to my attention that I had never heard of before, and I'm guessing that you probably never heard of it either. It was a game that I never would have had a chance to play as a child because I was a hardcore PlayStation kid, and to this day I've never owned an Xbox. But he was telling me about this game that was what he described as basically a card game, but one where you could like run around and interact with the environment. And so instantly I'm intrigued because I love card games. I've played card games for a very long time. I play them all very casually, but I've played so many of them. And the thing is, if you look this game up online, what you're going to see is Phantom Dust compared to a card game, but it's a little weird only because that's only about half the story. Phantom Dust is a lot more than just a card game. It's basically what you get when you ask the question, what if we mixed a card game with an arena battler? And if you don't know what I mean by arena battlers are a subgenre of fighting games. So I'm talking about games like the Naruto Ninja Storm games, Dragon Ball Budokai Tenkaichi, or maybe even Final Fantasy Dissidia. So finally, at the end of 2023, I played this game, Phantom Dust, for the very first time. And just so you know, you could also play it right now if you wanted to, if you own the Xbox Game Pass. And so without further ado, here was my journey with
Phantom Dust.
So we begin our journey in Phantom Dust with an ominous exposition dump that sets up the game's premise and introduces us to the world. So from the intro, we learned quite a number of weird aspects and rules of this game's universe. So first off, it takes place in some sort of post-apocalyptic future. The world is basically devoid of life and has been engulfed by some sort of mysterious dust that, for some reason, evokes extreme memory loss in the minds of humans. Also, for some reason, strange monsters began to appear either with or sometime after the dust appeared, so everyone started to just hide underground. And also, for some reason, the dust gives some people psychic powers. Every once in a while, these psychic underground dwellers will take excursions to the surface to try and uncover clues to their past. And it's during one of these excursions that these psychic scavengers, who are known as espers, come across our two main characters, Edgar and the player character, whom you can give a lot of different names. I decided to call him Ice in my playthrough, so I might refer to him as that sometimes in this video. And so Edgar and Ice are awoken in the headquarters of this group of espers who call themselves the Visions. And naturally, like everyone else in the world, they have severe amnesia and have no idea who they are. The only clues are a locket around Edgar's neck with the image of some mysterious woman, and an image of some unknown ruins that everyone seems to share for some reason. And by the way, let me take this moment to say that I absolutely love the way your protagonist, the main character, looks in this game. I think he's got a really unique and interesting design to him. I'm kind of bummed out that he's been regulated to the silent protagonist type. I feel like it's almost a waste of a really cool design. And Edgar, I like his face and hair, and I think he looks really good in all the promo art and in the cutscenes, but I think his outfit leaves a little bit to be desired. Anyways, the leaders of the Visions explain that they're looking for these enigmatic ruins that appear to everyone, and ask for the help of the newly awoken pair, since they too appear to have magical powers. And because Edgar would also like to find out who this lady in his locket is, the two agree. And so embarks your quest, which consists of many missions, but the first of which are meant to introduce you to Phantom Dust's crazy battle system. But just what is this crazy battle system that I'm referring to? Well, so right off the bat, Phantom Dust is a game probably unlike any that you've played. I said at the beginning, it's basically what you get when you cross a card game with an arena battler. So before you go into a game, you'll build your arsenal, which is basically your deck, with a mix of offensive, defensive, and utility spells from your available stock. Stock is a word they use for your card collection. And when a match begins, you'll see these colored orbs in your starting area, which will be randomly drawn from your arsenal, and these can be walked over to be picked up and be put into what's essentially your hand. Spells cost aura to cast, which slowly replenishes over time. And you can have a max aura up to your level, which you can increase by picking up these white orbs that usually make up about half your deck. Spells also belong to one of 5 schools, what other card games might call colors or factions, and all of which I think have some pretty cool names. So we've got Psycho, Nature, Key, my favorite, Faith, and Optical. And of course they all have their own general themes and style, and at the beginning of the game you can combine up to 2 schools into a single arsenal, and you'll unlock 3 school arsenals later on down the line. Attack spells, as you've probably guessed, allow you to deal damage to your opponent. Attack spells each have a strength, a range, and sometimes a type that describes the path the attack takes to get to your opponent. Defensive spells protect you against these attacks, but they're usually not automatic. Rather, you must time them against your opponent's attacks to ensure you won't take any damage. And you'll have other kinds of spells that allow you to do things like levitate, dash, heal, or even add global buffs and debuffs to really change the flow of a round. But being that this is essentially a 3D card game, there's a lot more to combat than just playing your spells, because you also have an environment that you can interact with. So let's look at this spell Bullet of Fire, for example. It has a medium range, so if I'm close or too far from my opponent when I use it, it's going to completely whiff. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. If I'm in range, my opponent could use a defensive spell, or they could dodge roll. They could move behind cover, and perhaps the cover could even break and send some of the environment crashing down upon them. Although to be honest, I had a very difficult time trying to do that sort of thing on purpose. But by having this cross between genres, we create a game that can feel a lot more dynamic and unpredictable than your usual run-of-the-mill card game. Now, if all that sounds cool to you, well, I can assure you it absolutely is, but there's unfortunately some pretty big caveats that I want to get into later on. But before I do, I want to go through my journey with the story mode to Phantom Dust, now that I've given you an overview of what the game actually plays like. Alright, so first of all, I was very surprised by how cool the story ended up being in hindsight. But I want to stress the in hindsight part, because while I was going through the story mode, I think I was going a little bit crazy. I think old games tend to have this thing about being very long, with very little major story beats actually happening during that time. You know, I guess it makes sense that games back then were usually more gameplay focused. So that is very much the case here with Phantom Dust. There are 7 chapters, and I don't think it was until chapter 5 that I finally thought that the story was getting, I would say, any amount of interesting. And from there, nothing else majorly interesting happens until the very end, and then the story is resolved. So it's your typical PS2, Xbox era game in that regard. But again, when you actually look back at the setting and what happened, Phantom Dust has a surprisingly unique and interesting world that I really want to know more about. One thing that might have helped with the lack of interesting story beats might have been the many characters you can talk to around your hub, who all at first glance seem pretty quirky and interesting in their own right. But unfortunately, and maybe it's just the Japanese to English translations, but most of the dialogue in this game is absolutely not worth reading. The writing in this game makes characters feel very stilted, which is a huge shame because I actually like all their cool and wacky designs. But if you gave me a piece of random dialogue, I'd probably have a hard time telling you who said what and for what reason, and that's a bit of a bummer. And since this game is so weird, and since the story mode has a few issues, I'm actually going to assume that not everyone who watches this video is actually going to go play it. So I would like to actually go through the story from here on out. And so heads up, if you don't want the story spoiled for you, please, I'll put a timestamp up on the screen or something, but please skip to that. And so anyways, let's go through the entire story. Alright, so you spent a good amount of time at the beginning of the game being shown the ropes by this guy named Meister. And when it comes time for your qualification exams, you and Meister are suddenly attacked, and in a surprisingly brutal little cutscene, by a woman named Freya, whom you can probably guess is the woman from Edgar's locket, and for some reason she doesn't want you to be traveling above ground, and so naturally you'll fight. So after defeating her, the protagonist is inclined to chase after her, but he's warned by Meister not to, since staying on the surface for too long can cause you to lose more of your memories. When you next encounter Freya, Edgar is tagging alongside you, and upon seeing her, he begins to reclaim some of his lost memories. I think it's around here that the game actually allows you to build your own arsenal. So prior to this, you just had to use the game's preset arsenals, which I did not find to be very engaging. Maybe because the original arsenal just didn't suit my own playstyle. So things really open up here gameplay wise, and you even unlock the ability to open random boxes of spells called junk, because what would a card game be without random card game packs? Anyways, Edgar's encounter with Freya has him all frazzled and rebellious, and eventually he'll go on to try to find her on his own. Eventually the player character will catch up to him, and to his dismay, he'll find that Edgar has no intention of coming back, and even worse, is now hostile to him and the rest of the Visions. After a large number of somewhat repetitive missions, you'll finally encounter Edgar again, and he'll give hints to some mysterious betrayal from the past, as well as to the origins of the player character. And after defeating him, he'll leave behind a very crucial memory. Alright, so listen up here because this is where the story really starts to get good. The recovery of the memory box leads into what might be my favorite scene in the whole game. It is revealed that Edgar was actually some sort of explorer or astronaut, probably from well before the world became apocalyptic. But kind of like in the movie Interstellar, Edgar ended up traveling too close to a black hole, succumbing to the effects of time dilation, and having been returned to Earth after what to him only seemed like 3 days, but for the rest of the world was something like 10 or 11,000 years. And he then discovered the world as we know it today, the world of phantom dust, which was devoid of life and covered in mysterious dust. But for some reason, Edgar realizes he can control the dust. It gives him powers, much like how it gives the rest of the Espers powers. Only Edgar's powers were far greater. The dust allowed him to bring entirely new objects into existence. So if he thought of an apple, for example, an apple would just magically appear out of the dust. Eventually, Edgar realizes that if he can conjure random objects into existence, perhaps he could create people. New people, so he'd no longer feel alone, and so the planet was no longer just a desolate waste devoid of life. And eventually, after almost 10 years of living alone on this planet, he finally manages to do it. Beginning with Freya, the woman he loved before he left on his initial journey, and then with the player character, based on Edgar's previous best friend. And he would go on to create more people. He'd create an entire city of them. And though at this point he's finally happy to not be alone, feelings of doubt seem to creep in as he remembers that these people aren't truly human, but rather, in his words, just visions. When the memory box is done, everyone in the room who witnessed the truth, this revelation, they all begin to panic, realizing that they are nothing more than mere artificial constructs, and one by one they all begin to vanish from existence. All that is except for the player character. Okay, so now I'll be honest at this point that after 4 chapters of repetitive missions with not that much happening, I was getting a little bored with the story. But as soon as I saw these scenes, I was basically wide awake again. I mean, if you get the time, you should at least go and watch these scenes because I think they're very well done and very well voice acted. Alright, so now you get this small part of the game where the rest of the Visions think you might have killed their leadership, but eventually you clear your name and everyone trusts you again. And eventually you'll meet back up with Freya. After another actually somewhat tricky boss battle for me for some reason, Freya relinquishes another memory. It is here that we discover that Edgar at some point got angry with his creations, realizing that they came with some of his memories, and especially the memory of the ruins, a place that for some reason Edgar wanted no one else to know about. Edgar is now disgusted by the fake beings he's created. While attempting to dismantle all that he's done, the player character intervenes, resulting in a large battle that renders them both unconscious. Freya kept them alive and eventually uncovered her true origins, but she did not disappear, saying that it was Edgar's will, or maybe the thought that Edgar might still need her, that kept her alive. Now realizing, or maybe just feeling as though Edgar no longer needs her, Freya loses the will to continue existing and also vanishes from existence, meeting the same fate as the many Visions did early in the story. So with her last words, she begs you to stop Edgar from destroying all that he has created. At the final leg of our story, we confront Edgar for the final time at the enigmatic ruins that we've been alluding to all this time. A new Freya construct reveals that these ruins mark the final meeting place of Edgar and the real Freya prior to his departure into space, and a memory he wished to share only with the real Freya. So after defeating Edgar, along with the new Freya construct and a newly created ice construct, the protagonist ventures deeper into the ruins to find the newest Freya construct hovering over an unconscious Edgar. Angered at the thought of any more change, the pair transform into a monster, and after it's been defeated, we are finally treated to the final scene of the game. It is here that we learn that the Edgar we've known this entire time was also a construct created by the original Edgar long ago. For some reason, perhaps from prolonged exposure to the phantom dust, the original Edgar began to die. And so with the last of his powers, he created a copy of himself in the hopes that this copy would continue his work and allow the world to continue thriving even in his absence. For some reason, this construct turned out to be more angry and pessimistic than the original Edgar was. And so the Edgar construct vanishes and the player character learns of the true intentions of the original Edgar. And so with this knowledge, the player character walks off into the desert, intending to carry out the will of its original creator and his long lost friend. So as I sit here and think back on it all, it's actually a really cool story that I haven't actually been able to stop thinking about since I beat the game. And if you agree, maybe you're sitting there thinking, man, I kind of wish I had experienced that for myself. But there's a few other aspects to the story mode that I want to mention. So first off, the game starts out kind of slow. And by that I mean gameplay wise, I don't think things pick up or get very interesting until you beat the very first boss. So when you do beat the very first boss, that's when you finally unlock the ability to build your own arsenal. And then you get to experiment and actually use a playstyle that you might find more fun. Secondly, the story mode is actually kind of long. And I mentioned it while reading the story, but I found the missions to be very repetitive. Like, not a lot of the missions feel very different from one another unless it was a boss battle. And the game recycles the same 3 maps in the very beginning of the game for a long time. So just be mentally prepared for that. But thirdly, and this is the most important one, this is something that you have to kind of acknowledge is a flaw in the game, even if you really love this game. And that is how they handle the missions. Because in this game, you don't know where your next mission is. There's no marker for it. You just have to come upon it by talking to all the NPCs and finding out which one is holding the mission at any given time. So I'm someone who likes to play games completely blind. I don't like to look things up on the internet. I don't like using guides. I never have. I always have this feeling like I want to experience the game the way the designer intended it. But if this was the way the designer intended it, well then that's asinine, because you just have to talk. There are like 20 NPCs around the whole starting hub, and you just have to talk to all of them to see which one might have the mission. I mean, that's crazy. I think I was up to like chapter 4 at least doing this, thinking, am I missing something? There must be a marker around here somewhere that I'm just missing. And because I was missing it, I was just like, I'll just suffer and keep on looking for the random NPC. But then I paused the game and found out in the pause menu, they have like an NPC guide. And I was like, oh, what's this? I clicked to it and it goes to some external website. So it turns out that in game, they try to push you to some external website to try to find which NPC you need to talk to. The link was broken, but I figured, you know what? That's a good enough reason for me to stop playing in this asinine way and just go. I went to the Phantom Dust wiki and I just started using the NPC guide from then on out. So just be warned, if you're going to play this game, just look up the NPC guide online and it'll make your life 1,000 times easier. All right, so the story and world of Phantom Dust are very unique, very cool, very philosophical, very engaging, and I'm really glad I got to experience it. But when you're actually playing through the story mode, it can feel very slow, very repetitive, and sometimes a little bit, or not a little bit, very dated. So just keep all that in mind if you do decide to play the story mode for yourself. So this is absolutely a story and a world that I wanted to see more of. I was very sad that we never got to find out where the dust came from. I really want a sequel for this, for the story alone. I really hope that this game gets revisited one day because I have not stopped thinking about it since I beat the game. All right, enough about the story. Let's get back to the gameplay because the gameplay is the true heart of what makes Phantom Dust what it is. I know I gave you an overview of what the gameplay was like at the beginning, but I feel like it's very hard to get across what the game is like in just words. So what I'd like to do now is I'd like to actually play through a whole round of Phantom Dust so you can see what a round of Phantom Dust is like. All right, so if you would like to watch that, once again, I'm going to leave a timestamp on the screen in case you just want to skip over that part. But if you'd like to see what a round of Phantom Dust actually looks like, well, here we go. All right, so we've beaten the game already. I'm pretty sure there's a way to play through the missions that we've already played through. All right, memory box? No. Play data? No. Simulator? All right, here we go. All right, well, this is unfortunate because I have no aura to begin with, so I'm just going to be waiting for a little bit to get some level. So you can see there at the bottom right, I'm level 1. I have 1 mana, but you can't do much with 1 mana. Up at the top left, you have your health. This is highly unfortunate. I don't want to get rid of my railgun, but I might have to. I might just get rid of my defensive spell here. Alright, so that's level 2. So if we can get 1 more white particle, we can get to level 5 at least. Please be an aura, 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 please be an aura. Prohibit scale store cost of 2 or lower. Okay, that's fine. I didn't see there was an environmental effect at the bottom left. Alright, we're good here. So now I'm gonna buff myself up, increase my acquisition, increase my damage, but this lowers my aura recovery speed, but it's worth it. Ow. Ow, that was not good. Do that again. Speed myself up. Alright, I should start attacking. So we got a parabola shot, let's go. Defended it. Let's do it again to see if it works. Nope. That's medium range, so I want the reticle to be yellow. I do that. Cool. Like a heal. Yeah, candy. And I got a defense spell. Heck yeah. Okay. We're in. We're in. Where are we? Alright. Let's rock shot this guy. Okay, missed. Again. He blocked it. Oh, the attack was coming my way. Let's go. He's too far away for that. What else do we got here? Another heal. We can save that. Wait on that. I need 7 or less skills left. I have 13, so I can't use that yet. I mean, I'll pick it up though to draw more cards. Oop. Nope, missed. I can do it again. I can spam it. He fell off the stage. That's an extra 3 damage to him. I was hoping he would get in range when I do that. Okay. I think, yeah, the strength of, they have defensive spells, but my attack now is so strong it's destroying their defensive spells, so that's good. I don't know why I threw that. That was never gonna hit. There we go. Oh, dodged it. It's okay. Oh. Keep going. Nice. We got this guy here. Heck yeah. Okay, they're both out. Are we done? Oh no, more spawn. Okay. Okay. Let's increase our acquisition some more. Okay, we're now at 7 or fewer spells, so my cluster bomb is online, which It looks like it has a higher base strength, so that's nice. And that is also a medium. Nice. Okay, I'm destroying their defenses here. Yes. Wow, I actually did not expect it to hone in that much. That was kind of crazy. Oh. I think it tried to attack me, but it hit the environment. Whoa. Okay, I suck. Oh, and I lost my spell for that. Damn it. I dodged that one, or blocked it. Oh, if you didn't notice, I also have a partner AI here. So another way to get, or not another way, I haven't explained this yet, but one way to get past people's defenses is to kind of use your partner, like you both go after the same guy and they'll eventually run out of aura for their defense, but it's kind of hard to rely on the AI sometimes to do that. Depends on the mission, and so I just try to... Oh, man. I'm overpowered now. Heck yeah. Okay, that was a pretty good fight. Alright, that was one round of Phantom Dust. Alright, let's get back to the video. Alright, so after that, you'll know if the game looks cool to you or not. Obviously, it looked cool to me, and I thought it was really cool. So keep in mind, I like this game. I do think it's a really cool game, but there are some pretty big issues I have with the gameplay that all really just stem from the fact that this is like a 20-year-old game now. This is an old game, so I hesitate to even call these complaints because I forgive it. This would be like me going back to the very first Street Fighter and making complaints about all the things that game does wrong. I mean, it was the very first Street Fighter. This is the very first in its genre. There aren't very many games like this, and there were definitely no games like this at the time. So I don't want to call these complaints. They're more like things I hope that if we ever do get a Phantom Dust 2, it is what I would like to see addressed from the very first game. Things that I would like to see get fixed in the second game, or if someone decides to take up the mantle of making a game like this. All right, so first off, while I actually think a lot of the card game side of this game is pretty cool, I'm not as crazy about the arena battler side. And I think a big contributor to that is the movement. So I was actually surprised by how slow the game felt when I started playing, especially in the early chapters. The thing is, when I see this 3D space and some opponents on the other side of the field, my brain wants to go in and start punching them so badly. But a lot of the game is spent in the beginning sort of just building a decent enough hand so you can actually start doing anything. Now, obviously, being no stranger to card games, I am well aware that a lot of the early turns of any card game can feel very slow. But again, the 3D-ness of this game is making me feel at odds with what I'm actually used to. It makes it a little harder for me to deal with how slow the game can feel sometimes. Hilariously, even when you finally do have a hand where you can do stuff, it can still feel kind of slow between major things happening. Every player has their own designated starting area, and if an opponent is hanging around theirs looking for their ideal cards, you're probably going to be spending a good amount of time getting into position so you can use your spells. That is like running across the other side of the map to wherever their spawn is. And if your spells are one of those one-time use spells, well then you're going to have to run all the way back to your spawn to keep on drawing more orbs until you find something else that'll come in handy, and repeat. Now, there are some neat movement options that allow you to get into position faster, but since this is a card game, you're going to have to draw them first. And this is a bit of a weird thing, but I actually didn't like a good amount of these options even when you did draw them. The first mission where they introduced the spell Levitate to you, I found out immediately that floating in the air is a very bad thing for you. You can't use defensive spells in the air, and a lot of your attacks don't work, which you're just going to have to find out with trial and error since the spells don't go into as much detail as I think they need to when you're building your arsenal, but that's a spoiler for my second problem. And if you get hit, you'll take damage on landing and you'll begin rolling, which means you can risk falling off the stage depending on what stage you're on. And this is a really weird way to introduce spells to me if you're trying to show me how cool they are. Like, yes, go ahead and show me they can be risky to use, but at least let me see how they can be useful first. Now, I did have the dash spell in my arsenal, but most of my time wasn't spent playing spells or dodging. It was spent walking to wherever my opponents were and walking back to draw more cards. And it felt pretty awkward. It reminds me of playing the first iteration of any fighting game series where things just don't feel as responsive as their modern iterations. So if a Phantom Dust 2 does ever come around, one of the things I'll be very excited to see is just a faster start and better movement options. So much like how some card games allow you to configure a sort of loadout on top of the rest of your deck, I would like it if you had more basic movement options from the get-go. Maybe you could equip different equipment that allows you to run faster at the cost of lower starting level or something like that. And I would want the other movement options like levitation to not be so punishing. If only just so movement feels exciting. I want to be clear that I am in no way, shape, or form insinuating that levitating is unbalanced, since I haven't explored enough of this game to know that. I just know it didn't feel very good to use. Again, if you think back to other arena battlers like those Dragon Ball games, for example, movement is everything, and it feels so fun to just fly around in those games. So that's one half of the game that I would have liked to have seen expanded upon. All right, so now I know I just said that I like the card game side of things, and I do, but there is one huge aspect of this game that I think this game missed when it comes to other card games, and that is when you're playing a card game, think back to whenever you've played a card game, and especially when someone plays a card against you, you have every opportunity to read that entire card and see what is exactly happening to you and what you can do about it. And that is absolutely not the case here. First of all, I do not feel like the spell descriptions give you enough information about the cards. With almost every spell, I had no idea how the spell was going to go until I actually used it quite a few times. And I don't just mean like, oh, is this working or is this not working in this deck, or is this actually a good strategy? I mean that if a spell said it had medium range, I had no idea if that was like a strict range or if there was still a chance to hit at long range. If my opponent was moving, how much tracking does this spell have? If I'm up close, how fast is the spell actually going to take the start up? How much environmental damage does it do? The tracking is the biggest offender to me. Two spells that look exactly the same could have entirely different tracking that could make one spell trivial to dodge versus another. And this is even the case for up-close melee spells. But this ambiguity gets a lot worse when you're getting into a new mission for the first time in a game. Because when an opponent used a new spell for the first time against me, I had no idea what the heck was going on. Sure, if I got hit with a new move, I could at least see the name of the spell in the bottom left, but that really didn't help that much at all. I had no idea what the path of the spell was, the range, the tracking, the strength, the school. Is that spell one-time use or not? So do I have to keep worrying about it? And this isn't as big of a deal for the offensive spells, but for the defensive spells, holy crap. Most of the defensive spells look very similar in this game. So when someone used one, I had no idea what the strength of the defensive move was. Sometimes I'd get the move reflected back at me with no way to tell that that was a reflect spell until I'm hit with the reflect. No idea what the strength is, so I don't know what spell I should be looking for to counter it. No clue how many times someone could use it or what the duration of the spell was, so on and so on. I am very convinced that this game gets a whole lot better once you memorize all the spells and can learn to recognize the subtleties between them. But when you're just learning this game, all those weird ambiguities can add up to some really frustrating moments where even if you have the tools, you have no idea what situation you're even trying to get out of. So the next thing I would really love to see for Phantom Dust 2 is just more information on the spell descriptions and more information on screen. So kind of like in Final Fantasy, when you see those little words above the characters' heads whenever they use a spell, I want to see maybe a small description at the bottom of the screen that summarizes the major aspects of the move. I want it to stay on the screen for a little while, and this might actually help me with my first complaint from earlier, where maybe I can use the time I spend running around to assess the information that's been given. Maybe I can see what spells have been played or consumed, and by who, and that sort of thing. Because taking away that sort of analytical part where you're assessing the entire state of the game is kind of a bummer when it comes to playing a 3D card game. Now, another annoying thing about the defensive spells is that if you have an attack that does low damage, and let's say your attack is a strength 2 and their defensive spell is a strength 4. Well, then your attack is just never going through their defensive spell ever. And you can kind of end up in this weird stalemate position where you're like, I have an attack and it's just not working against the defensive spell and I don't know what else to do. I found this one spell that has a very long startup. Like you hold the button down and the AI doesn't know when you're going to let go. So every time I even hit the button, they would without fail use their defensive spell. And then I would get around their defensive spells that way. But that felt a little cheesy. So later on in the game, you do finally unlock more spells that allow you to sort of get over this. Stuff that enhances your tracking, stuff that enhances your strength. And when I was finally able to build that deck, which I only used once for the final boss, it felt really good. Like it felt really good to get past all those defensive spells and make myself feel very powerful. But for most of the game, the defensive spell dynamic just felt kind of weird. So my last maybe wish list thing possibly would be to maybe make it so more defensive spells have more than just either one-time use or infinite time use. Maybe make it so that they have actual health values so they can only absorb so much damage before they finally disappear. And again, this is a weird one because it really is only a complaint because I was playing against the AI. I wonder if playing against human players, it would even be that big of a deal. All right. This video has gone on long enough, so here are my final thoughts. So a lot of people will say that Phantom Dust was ahead of its time, okay? Is that true? Yes. I think absolutely Phantom Dust was a game well ahead of its time. However, I don't think it's a game that's ahead of our time. That is, I think if you're playing the game for the very first time in 2024, I don't think that the game is actually going to feel great. It's gonna be like trying to go back and play the very first Tekken for the very first time. Phantom Dust was released back in 2004, which means that this year is Phantom Dust's 20th anniversary. I am really hoping that this game makes a return. Maybe, just maybe, Xbox will want to bring this game back with a modern control scheme and everything that we've ever learned from playing so many card games over these 20 years. So Phantom Dust really is something special. Thank you to my brother for showing me this game and pointing it out to me. I really appreciate it. Anyways, guys, thanks for watching the video. Guys, this is my second video ever on this channel and maybe my fourth video I've ever made ever. So if you guys have any feedback for me, like something that you'd like to see improved before anything else, because I'm trying to improve everything, but if you don't like the audio, if you don't like the video setting itself, or maybe you didn't like something about the content, please let me know so I can try to improve it. I did want to try to make this one better than the last three because I actually think that Phantom Dust deserves it, and I hope that that came across in the video. Okay? All right, that's all I have to say. Thank you guys for watching, and adios.